going to get through 4 things today, if I can bribe Sarah with a glass of beer later on this afternoon, looking at some key arguments that we've seen really emerging out of research on innovation and entrepreneurship, ways we can support innovation as policymakers, perhaps as people who work in economic development, or at the local colleges, and workforce development. Highlight an example from Northern Ontario, and then hopefully end with a quick introduction to disruptive innovation. So there's 4 kind of takeaways that I hope you can walk away with today. These are key arguments that have emerged over the last 20 years in our innovation research. The first is that innovation is a social process, and hopefully this doesn't come as a surprise to any of us in the room. Firms do not do this alone. Entrepreneurs do not do this alone. It's a messy process. They're out there, they're talking to people, they're getting ideas, they're working with different institutions, different stakeholders, and that brings us to our kind of second key argument, that for this innovation to happen, there needs to be a wide variety of interaction and learning that's taking place between innovation stakeholders, and this can include industries, the firms themselves, and entrepreneurs. It can be post-secondary institutions like our colleges, our universities, government agencies, and even civil society, not-for-profit organizations have a strong role here to play in an innovation ecosystem. Related to this is the idea of institutional thickness and the infrastructure that's there to help support entrepreneurs and innovation in your particular community or region. And the final argument that fits very nicely with Sean and Ryan and probably folks who are going to follow me is that geography or place matters to firms and entrepreneurs. They become attached to particular regions due to those place-based assets that Sean has talked about this morning already. And these assets really have a direct impact on a region's competitive advantage. So when we're looking at ways we can support innovation, entrepreneurship, there's a variety of policy tools that have been used around the world. We can put them into 4 kind of broad categories. The first is really general. These aren't place-specific, they're place-neutral. This might be things like tax credits. Federal government has SR-ED tax credit programs, so that's an example of one type of initiative there. You can have specific policies. These are place-based, and we do a terrible job here in Canada with actually trying to do place-based regional innovation strategies. In the EU, where there's a much stronger history of doing so, we have regional innovation system strategies. Smart specialization is the new catchword, and I don't have enough time this morning to go through that, but happy to answer questions if folks are interested in it. The only province that's actively trying to do this right now in Canada is Newfoundland and Labrador. They recently came out with an initiative where they are going to pilot 5 regional innovation systems strategies across the province. And I'm working on 2 of those projects with the government and stakeholders there. Innovation policies can also be systems-based, which means you focus on that regional innovation system, try to enhance the functioning of it. That might be through business networks, business associations, networking events, facilitating external linkages, so getting all of the interesting things that are happening in your community, in your region, with your entrepreneurs, and bringing them to trade shows or industry events and getting it out there for the world to see. They can also be actor-based, so focused on the entrepreneurs themselves. Might be incubators, maker spaces, skills training. Reverse mentoring is this new cool thing where you take youth, especially in high schools, put them in your established businesses that are working with some of the startups so they can show them how to use all that new tech skills and social media to really shake things up. So moving on to one of the examples that I really wanted to highlight, and Sudbury is not really considered a rural community, but it is northern, and so I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of the challenges that the community does face. And I also thought it would be useful considering the efforts here surrounding the Metal Tech Alley. So the story of Sudbury's kind of mining cluster that we're going to hear about in a few seconds, it really begins in the late 1970s, and during this time the major mining companies in the city started downsizing and outsourcing a lot of their services and production due to a large number of external economic forces. There was labor disputes and also new production technologies that meant less workers, but they could produce more. So by 1981, approximately 10,000 people had been laid off from the industry. One positive result of that release of labor was that a number of these miners actually wanted to stay in Sudbury. And they decided, with that tacit knowledge they had of those companies, that they could actually start their own companies and supply the industry. But these companies and the presence of a cluster that were emerging were overlooked and ignored by both our local, provincial, and federal decision makers. Mining was seen as dirty, dangerous, and dying, and especially when the city was trying to move to the so-called knowledge economy, they didn't want their diversification efforts to be ruined by a focus on this mining cluster. That all changed in the early 2000s by some of the work that was coming out of Laurentian University and identifying the importance of the cluster. And it was officially recognized by the city and became a key engine of economic growth. So we now have about 13,500 people, over 300 companies, generating $4 billion in economic activity. They have a number of different capabilities, from mine engineering, mine management, to equipment, manufacturing, and rebuilds and support for the industry. Related to the cluster, and perhaps more important, is all of the regional support institutions that have grown along with it. So the first is looking at some of the technology diffusion or support for entrepreneurs and innovation activities. So we have NORCAT, which was established in 1995 at Cambrian College, which is our local college in town. And this was really spearheaded by one of the local deans at the college, as well as the president at the time. They traveled to Finland to try and learn about what was happening there in terms of commercialization and innovation centers, and bring that knowledge back to Sudbury to see if they could create something similar that could help stem youth out migration, but also provide support to SMEs in the mining sector. So NORCAT has since evolved over the last kind of 20, 30 years to include an innovation mill, which supports and mentors entrepreneurs. They also have various in-house training programs that they use in partnerships with some of our other regional business centers. They also recently partnered with Forte Discovery Lab to provide a kind of prototype center with all the latest in technology. And they also have an underground testing facility. So if you create some new product, you can actually go and prototype and test it underground. Around that, there's a number of different mining education and training programs that exist at Laurentian University, from School of Engineering to Earth Sciences at Cambrian College and Collège Boreal. They both have mine engineering technician programs and a wide variety of technology programs related to mining. There's also a number of mining innovation research institutes that have emerged to build on that education and training capacity, including, we have SEMI, your battery's dying, so we're all good, and a number of others. And what's been interesting, there's probably about 5 or 6 research institutions that have emerged really in the last 10 years. And now they've decided, okay, we're all kind of doing our thing, but we're not really working together and having those conversations needed. So they've created a Laurentian Mining Innovation and Technology Organization to kind of bring that all together and make sure that that collaboration and learning is happening between them. We also have a Mining Supply and Services Association that grew up to kind of support the cluster and work and identify challenges and opportunities with the SMEs in Sudbury and across Northern Ontario. The final component is our regional authorities that support economic development. So we're lucky enough to have the headquarters of the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines in Sudbury, as well as agencies like the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund Corporation and FedNor, which is our equivalent to Western Diversification. They provide that funding for entrepreneurship, innovation, research, and development. And at the local level, mining innovation is now a cornerstone of our economic development strategy for the city. And we've recently rebranded the city as Canada's resourceful city, building on that rich mining legacy, but also the perseverance of actors within the community. So in terms of some of the challenges that we saw in the Sudbury case, but also resonates with work that I've done across the country in the Yukon and Newfoundland, access to capital, money, that's always an issue. There's also a real lack of understanding in some of our rural northern communities, both with firms themselves, but sometimes with our economic development people, about what innovation is. And so oftentimes communities or firms don't see what they're doing as necessarily innovative because it's not that radical product, new to the world kind of innovation that's occurring. There can also be a certain degree of complacency or fear of trying to do new things. People get, a little comfortable in what they're doing. A lack of collaboration between those key innovation stakeholders can also be a challenge. And then much of that innovation that is happening in Sudbury is focused on the backward linkages rather than that value-added development. Sean calls it the resource bank approach. I call it rip it out and ship it out. It's the mentality that's really pervasive in our resource industry across the country, and this is what actually causes us to have that degrade when it comes to innovation, because when we export a lot of our unprocessed, semi-processed resources, we're also exporting the opportunity to innovate. Equally concerning from the Severy perspective and the firm level is that they're really dependent on home market sales. So they're supplying usually to one or two major companies, either within the community or within the region, and that makes us still prone to those boom-bust kind of economic shocks. So lessons for success: place matters. We've heard that constantly today. Be strategic, have a plan. So once people started recognizing that this did exist and started working to try and put some of those pieces together, we really saw it take off. And a lot of the efforts happen by acting regionally but also collaboratively together, breaking down those silos. Unfortunately, it's not going to happen overnight. There are some quick wins that you can get, but really these are long-term things that we do have to be patient. And then as economic development practitioners or policymakers, try and that same advice we give to entrepreneurs or existing businesses about fostering a culture of innovation in your company, try and do that with your policies as well. Don't be afraid to take risks and try new things and look on what's going elsewhere. So very quickly, because I have like 30 seconds left, I just wanted to make mention of disruptive innovation because I think that our rural and our northern regions are actually going to be impacted more by the shifts that we're seeing in technology. There's a number of reports out at the moment. If you want a really quick read, The Age of Disruption by Deloitte will hopefully scare you. It talks about all of the different technologies from blockchain to AI, advanced manufacturing, and how that is going to fundamentally reshape the future of life and work in Canada. And so some of the things that we need to be aware of, especially from a workforce development perspective, is job creation. So there's going to be jobs related to this. It's just going to be different jobs. So we need to start thinking about what those skills are that might be needed. We are unfortunately going to see job destruction. So a number of jobs are going to be lost, and job displacement. So you see this great photo of a miner working in front of a computer. That might be able to be done in Vancouver when the mine's in northern BC. So we do have to be prepared for that and what that might mean for our communities. So I'd like to thank you for your time this morning. Happy to answer any questions, or you can give me an email.